Today's reading is the second half of last week's reading, which was hinted at in this week's reading, and it was called How Devotees Fall. That was last week. This week is How Devotees Rise. Arivan had the privilege of talking about how devotees fall, and he started very well, so I'll quote the joke again. I am an expert, he said, on how devotees fall. But the mere fact that he was standing here talking to you, gives a lie to what he was saying because he was standing there. Forgive me, Arivan, you can just leave the room if you want. He grew up in this community. He's one of ours. And when I remember when we were way over in the little office building up there, he was small enough that he was in Gary's arms. Gary's a big man, but Ariman was really little. And he came up for the blessing. And he came up for the blessing that way every week, but apparently this particular week he just had it. So I reached out to touch him on the head, and he started in a very loud voice. He put both his hands, little hands, over his spiritual eye and started saying, no, 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 like this. Fortunately, we didn't define him by his failure, and apparently there was some conversation between his dad and him after they went out of the temple. But, there's days like that. There was a time when we were at Ananda village, all of us, because that was the only Ananda there was, and we all came to every event that happened, and many people lived quite isolated and solitary. But everybody was always at everything, especially when Swami gave Kriya, which he only did once or twice a year. And that particular night, there was a person who didn't show up, a man who lived by himself, and he didn't show up for Kriya. Is he dead in his trailer? I mean, it's a real thought in our minds, because why would you not come? So the next morning, Swamiji sent me over to his house. I knocked on his door, and fortunately, he just came to the door. He wasn't dead inside. And I said, Swami was concerned because you weren't there last night. And he very honestly answered me, I just didn't feel like bowing down to the gurus last night, was his answer. So I carried it back to Swami. Here was Swami's response. I know, sometimes that's how you feel. Just so easy like that. There wasn't any part of him that wanted to say you ought to be different. So now I'm here to talk to you about how devotees rise. And I am standing here, and I was sitting across from Nitai not too long ago. Nitai is a founding member of Ananda of my vintage. And I noticed that he'd gotten old. I'm not really sure how it happened. And even though there was no mirror in the room, there was an implication that it also applied to me. But honestly, I began to cry just spontaneously. I'm going to cry again. Because I remember when I was running the kitchen at the retreat, this would have been like 1972, and Nitai arrived at that time, and he washed a lot of dishes for me in there. And if the dishwashers weren't paying attention, they would be cleaning up for one meal, and then I'd start slipping in the stuff from preparing the next meal. At a certain point, they would figure it out, and they would leave. But Nitai and I went through that a lot. So it was a lot of time in those very early years. And there he was, and he'd gotten old. And I said, we came young, we're now old, and we're still here. That's how devotees rise. It's really not different than that. It's just, give me a minute. Narayani is visiting, and of course, she and I had a lot of experiences together with Swami, so I'm a little mushy today, very mushy. Just, how did it happen? I don't know how it happened. I really can't tell you how it happened. And also, we're outside doing the fire ceremony. Many of you were there. And the circle is too big. The fire is really small. It would be nice if the fire were bigger, but the fire is really small. And it takes me back to those early years when somebody dug a pit in the ground up at the seclusion retreat and sort of made a little like stadium steps, but it was just dirt. We just put pads down. Swami would sit in the lower part, just a few stairs like this, and we would all have rice. I've told you this before, but the question is, do you throw the rice onto the fire Or do you just give it to Swami and hope he'll fix it? So you'd kind of just toss it and hope some of your karma would go onto his shoulders and then he would resolve it for you. He was always just covered at the end. It was partly just geography. I don't know how many people were being deliberate. So I've always had this memory in my mind, and you can well imagine, he did the fire ceremony. We didn't have the purification then, but he did the fire ceremony, and then we'd walk from the fire pit to the temple on Sundays. So it was the same time frame that it happened in, except he would talk and it would last longer. Vivid in one's memory, especially at the mature age that I have reached, there's a lot in there. But the pieces that really count really stand out, and those fire ceremonies really stand out. And they loom big like this. The fire was bigger, but they still loom like this. I recently saw a photograph. If there were 20 people there, that was the most. Maybe it would be 25, but that was the most. There were just almost none of us there. And we were living very isolated. It was long before any of this started. How did it happen? How did it happen that all these people standing up here have come thousands of miles, to go to Ananda village and all of this? How did it happen? And that is the answer to how do devotees rise. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't just, I had this great vision and I saw this, and then after that I was completely changed. Somebody told me, forgive me, I remember events, but I don't remember who said them to me. That's how my brain is working now. But somebody was talking about someone who wanted to know which one of us at Ananda could read their chakras and tell them how long it would be before they would be liberated, right? If we debated, are you going to pay per chakra or just like the whole? How much is it worth to you for me to pretend that I can answer your stupid question? I asked Swami the question once when Master said he remembered back to being a diamond. Someone asked me, and I passed it on because I thought it was a good question. How long does it take to go from being a diamond to a God-realized master? And it was not my shining hour with Swami, but I was comfortable by now to being an idiot in front of him. It was no problem. He said, I don't think he used the word stupid because he wouldn't have, but that's what I heard. But it was something like, what a ridiculous question. And his answer was, what would you do with that information? Like, why is your mind spinning? What would you do with that information? Well, I'm just entertaining myself over here. I responded. I thought it was an interesting question because I still do. Because I had a whole series of other questions. Is the diamond the heap of the crystal thing? Do you become an emerald after that? Then, are you the uncut diamond or the cut diamond? You see how many important questions there were that he wouldn't answer? The only thing he said to me was, all time is short compared to eternity. Now, that has been something that has proved really useful to me. I remember when Swamiji himself was having really difficult health, which he did in the last, he did all the way through, but increasingly toward the end. And I asked him, how are you doing? How are you feeling? He smiled and said, all time is short compared to eternity. Meaning, not very well, but what difference does it make? Now, there's something you can really use, isn't it? It'll just go with you. No, I had a point. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, yes. All of our friends being here, and how many different things had to happen over the years for Prague and for Belgrade and for, Croatia, just all these different places have to be touched by not just Master's presence, but by what Swamiji did and what all of us have done with him. Just how can you even begin? Who did every little tiny thing that happened that finally resulted in this? And how did it start? 20 of us sitting on pads on dirt, just doing the same fire ceremony we just did a few minutes ago. And there was no dramatic moment when, some bazillionaire gave us all the money in the world and we could build anything we wanted. None of that. It didn't come even slightly from the outside. Yes, there were outside activities, of course. We did our best. which was not always really impressive, but we did our best, to serve and to publicize and to talk. All of you know the Peanuts cartoon and the character called Pigpen, who there's a dirt cloud spins around him. And one of my favorite Peanuts cartoons was just 4 panels, no words. In the first panel, Pigpen is perfectly clean. In the second panel, it's beginning to swirl. And by the third and by the last one, he looks as much of a mess as he ever looks. We had an attorney from Vienna, which is a combination that's relevant. Let's simply say he was very exact about everything he did, and he tended to be very organized. And he came to Ananda village, I think probably before anything else existed, so it would have been like in the late 70s or so. And he tried to figure out how it functioned at all. Seva was in charge of the money then, and Seva's way of dealing is when she saw that the columns would not add up to a plus, she would just close the book. It was just like that, just better not to know what was going on. And I realized that Ananda as a whole was like those 4 panels of Pigpen, which is, you couldn't really figure out why, but it just created this. Now I know why. There it is. It's standing right behind us, is because they were constantly and are constantly just putting out this magnetic ray. And one by one, and it happens that way. It doesn't happen by all of civilization waking up. Some hundreds of years after the life of Christ, Christianity became the national religion of whatever country that was. And everybody thought, great, we've finally arrived. So I'm going to say, well, that was pretty much the end of it. Because all of a sudden, it's now what we all do. It's not what I, in my heart, will give my heart to because I feel called. I feel called by the divine to do this. And when that call comes, that's the beginning. That's how it starts. And I have to give Aryavan credit. For those of you who didn't hear it, go listen to it. But he talked really beautifully about Judas's mistake was not betraying Christ. It was feeling that his life was over because he'd made a mistake. That was when he fell. You see how different that is? It's not the fact that, of course we're stupid. How could we not be stupid? Just like, how many lifetimes have we had? We've had so many more than people want to say. Somebody will say, you're very old, you've had 12 lifetimes. You're probably just a lizard after 12 lifetimes. It's just like, you don't even want to know. It's another one of those, all time is short compared to eternity. Just hold on to that. It doesn't make any difference how long it's been, and doesn't make any difference how we got here. And it doesn't make any difference how long it's going to take us to get out. Not that I ever actually had the opportunity to pretend to read that man's chakras, which would have been very tempting just for the sheer devilishness of doing it. But the question I would have asked him if he'd been in front of me, if he cared enough for me to respond, what are you going to do with this information? Because you're not going to get free just by sitting there. You're going to get free by making the decision that I'm starting young or I'm starting very old, but I'm not going to give up. And every time that I perceive that I have wandered off of my objective, I know what I'll do. I'll bring myself back. Many times, many, 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 many times, over the many years now that I've been part of this path, I have really made big mistakes. Mistakes that were either super dramatic in the moment, that just kind of global humiliation, everybody knows about it, you just live through it. One of my absolute favorite spiritual opportunities, this is not me, this is a story about, I will say who it was, it's Haridas, many of you know, who's from Varanasi, where was he? Bangalore for many years, American, but now he's with his wife, running the meditation retreat, one of God's own, just absolute one of God's own. And he just always managed, no matter what happened, he always managed to break the right way. And I no longer remember the details because they're not important. But in some early phase of his life, he got confused. Gosh, has that ever happened to any of us? I can't remember. Anyway, he got confused, and somehow it got to be a difficulty for everyone. And our community, well, it's the same. Ananda has one nerve wire. You can never be the first to tell someone news, because as soon as news is known, everybody knows it like that. So even though I had nothing to do with Haridas, I was far away, he saw me. He just walks up to me like this, even standing closer than he would normally stand, and said, "Of course you know, what do you think?" Just like, wow, of course you know, what do you think? I said, Haridas, I couldn't care less. The fact that you're standing here and talking to me like this really literally could have been 50 years ago. It's just one of those things that just stays in my mind. That's how you rise, is that when you fall, you get up again. I mean, fall can be colossal global humiliation, which periodically it is, or it can just be, as at this stage of my life, that all of a sudden your own patterns become clearer to you. The karma tips. It just tips enough, so whereas you were always behaving this way, suddenly it occurs to you that maybe that's not the best way to behave. It begins to tip the other way. And every day you wake up. The other way that you rise is you notice that this is infinite. There's just absolutely no end to this. As far as I've come, and we have all come at least some distance, otherwise we wouldn't still be here. We would have given up by now. And we give up. We give up lots of times. The Bhagavad Gita has this wonderful chapter about sort of how we learn. At first, nobody ever talks to you about spiritual things, because why would they? It just doesn't occur. Then the people begin to talk to you about spiritual things when you fall asleep. Just boom, like that. I have to say, I used to teach a lot of classes at night before we had the internet, when everybody had to come in person. And so I would be all fresh because this was my job. This is what I did. They would all be really tired. So I had the unique experience of watching adults fall asleep, which most of us don't get to do, just like this. So apparently at a certain stage on the spiritual path, you might, but you just go to sleep. Then you hear it. You don't fall asleep, you hear it, but you don't understand a word of it. It's just like, I don't know what they're talking about, right? Then the next stage is you understand it while it's being spoken to you, but as soon as you walk away, you forget. Then it begins to stick. But, we only have so much spiritual karma. Swami, I remember him telling to us when some of us began to reach out from the village and have to be more involved, starting centers. He said, only a few people have lifelong spiritual karma. But he said, like us, most people have some. And it burns brightly and it's wonderful, but then they've done what they can for that incarnation and then they go on to something else. But that doesn't mean it wasn't a positive experience. That doesn't mean they didn't make great progress, but then they have to do other things and then come back. But eventually, and this is what we're looking for, this is what we're deeply looking for. What choice do I have? When Shivani asked Swamiji, what is the secret to success on the spiritual path? He said that he put it, that it's a matter of life and death. But not literally, not physical life and death, but what choice do I have? What would I gain by repudiating, by being mad at God and thinking it wasn't true? And don't worry about whether you're really good at it or not. The thing that really matters is where your heart is in this. Just where your heart is. I've been so touched over the years to hear people tell me, people that I wouldn't have expected to speak like this, people who didn't manifest outwardly the kind of outward life that I have lived. But then they would just tell me, Ananda, Master, Swamiji, autobiography, with the path, whatever book it was, whatever touched them, the music, it's the center of my life. And I would think, only God knows. Only God knows. But that's what we have to work with. Even if I think I would be happier if I had this, I want that, I have to pursue this. Our karma pushes us. And our karma isn't stupid. It knows that we need these experiences, but this is then what Swami's talking about. It's not what you do, it's what is at the center of what you're doing. Why are we following this action, this whatever? And you just bring God with you. You just make sure that wherever you are, you haven't separated yourself. That's all. I haven't separated myself. I'm out on an adventure. I'm testing out. I'm testing out for the 100 billionth time whether this will make me happy. Come along, God, let's see if this one makes me happy. Well, what do you know? It didn't. But you really haven't lost anything if you've kept that connection. What choice do I have? And that's all of it. That's how we rise. Whatever stage you come in, you just don't quit. People ask me all the time. No matter what it looks like to the outside world, no matter what it even looks like to you, just still in my heart, I have seen the light. I have understood. And build your spiritual life not on some imaginary idea of what it should look like. Sister Yanamata said that you have to build your spiritual life on the unshakable ground where you can stand, where nobody could persuade you that it isn't true. And maybe it's just that minute you had reading autobiography when all of a sudden the light came, and you just know that what he wrote in that book and who he is real. That's enough, because there you are. You're standing. Nothing can move you. It's a very good exercise inside your own heart. Ask yourself, what do you absolutely know? Not what you have read in a book, not what I told you the day before, but what do you actually know? And then rest in that. I often say to myself, I could die on this. Meaning, if I go to my life review and this is all I have, I'll just carry this to my life review. Look, I did that. All this I could have, I should have, I did, I didn't. Nope, I did this. I read autobiography, it spoke to me, I know it's true. Now, considering the billions of lifetimes we've had, and all the mistaken paths, you see how powerful that is? Absolute sincerity, what you really know to be true, and then it's just relax. And I don't mean become tamasic, I don't mean become weak or anything, but just relax. This is the story of God's love for us. You have to take that word unconditional, like put it into AI and see what it says to you. We often say the unconditional love of God and Guru. That means there's just absolutely nothing you can do to separate yourself. They have it even tougher than us. Once we embrace the spiritual path, they just have to stick with us until we get there. Really. That's Master says, 1 trillion times if necessary, as long as one stray brother is left behind. Yeah. I don't care if I'm the last name on the list. I am on the list. But what puts us on the list is not a casual sort of, maybe this will be good. It's that bone marrow realization that this is who I am. Just like that, this is who I am. At the end of Swamiji's life, no matter what the topic was, he would just talk about Master. And he would often tell us for the how many times, how he met Master, what it was like, and then it would almost be impossible for him to go on. Because of all the zillions of things that Swami did, the one that really held him was, I am a disciple. I am a disciple. And now, to come back to the fire ceremony where 20 of us were there, I don't know how it was done to move us from sitting on those pads on that dirt to having this beautiful temple, and this is only one of them, to having all of you who are visiting us and many more who are coming, just all these places on the planet where one person, 2, 3, 5, 10, also just heard the call of the Master and said, this is for me. This is what I'm going to do. But what made it grow, what will make it grow? It's nice to be good at what we do. It's not nice not to be clumsy. Once when Swami was he was trying to build the work in San Francisco, and we were earning money and he was getting people organized. We drove from San Francisco to Santa Rosa, I think it was an hour, to give a class. He had learned that if you give a paid series of classes, first you do a free lecture, then you sign them up for a paid series. Somewhere that critical point got lost. So the first event was a paid class for which 5 people came. And Swami and a whole crowd of us went up in the van, up like that. And we got there, and there were 5 people. Swami did a wonderful job, as he would. Afterwards, we're sort of getting back in the cars to go back to the city, and someone says, well, I guess Divine Mother just wanted just a few people to come, like that. Swami said, please, leave a little room for human error, which was our not hearing what he'd wanted us to do. So it isn't, yes, we have to do our best because it's our growth to wake up, to be creative, to be imaginative, to think outside the box, just like Swamiji did, to find new ways of doing this. But that isn't what has built Ananda and will continue to give this message to the whole world. It's the absolute sincerity and the trust in God and the sure knowledge that we are loved by God in each heart. That is the power. And no matter what else we do that. And then somehow or another, Master will do what he wants to have done, and this will grow. And the reason that's gratifying is because, wow, what a joy it is. People ask me, what would have happened without Swami? I use my own example, dead in a ditch, probably before I was 30. Nothing would have happened. And think about being able to give that gift, even to 1 or 2 other people. And all we have to do that is just keep living it. That's how we rise in God. Bless you.